Hi, I'm JJ Dela Cruz. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Department of Communication Arts and Sciences here at Penn State. And today I'll be presenting a study on the nature of coming out conversations, communicating outness. According to the US Census Bureau in 2021, there are approximately 20 million queer adults in the United States. If each of those queer people was to have a conversation where they disclose their sexual or gender identity to somebody or have a coming out conversation, then that leaves 20 million conversations for us to analyze to understand coming out. What does it look like? How often does it happen? Unfortunately, that comes with the assumption that this happens only once in a person's lifetime, which is not the case. Typically, people come out multiple times. And so we don't really know how often these conversations happen. This study wanted to kind of grapple with that and dig deeper into that question of what does coming out look like and how often do these conversations happen? To do so, I conducted an online survey of approximately 150 college students here at the University Park campus of Penn State. This sample was 50% queer and 50% cisgender and heterosexual. The sexual and gender identities that were represented in the sample include asexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, straight, and questioning. We also had genders including agender, cisgender, non-binary, gender fluid, and transgender people. We provided approximately 6 open-ended questions to people who participated in the survey, asking them from their experiences to define coming out, to define coming out conversations, and then also provide revisions, if they had any, to a definition that exists within the literature. And then also we asked for frequency of coming out. So how often were people coming out to people in their networks versus how often were they just disclosing information related to their sexual identity or their gender identity without specifically saying, I am blank, I am gay, I am transgender, so on and so forth. So the results of this study kind of can be broken into 2 different parts. First of all, the nature of coming out, and then second, the frequency of coming out. So when it comes to the nature of coming out, we saw these themes that emerged from the open-ended responses that we were looking at. First of all, when you're defining coming out, it's a more general process. People described it as relating to any non-normative identity, so it didn't just have to be about a queer identity. When discussing coming out conversations, however, then it became much more narrow and specific to disclosing a LGBTQ or queer identity. So that was one of the primary differences. We also got to do a comparison of the 2 subsets in our group or in our sample, the queer group versus the cisgender heterosexual group, to see if there were any differences. And we noticed that when we looked at the cisgender and heterosexual subset, there was more of a mention of the temporality of the identity that was being disclosed. So when queer people were talking about coming out, it was more about the process that was taking place. When cisgender heterosexual people were talking about coming out, they were talking about like the staying power of the identity, right? So we had responses ranging from, this is an identity that a person has adopted their entire life, they're just, you know, sharing it with people for the first time, or this is, you know, a choice that they're making, a new identity that they're adopting. So it was about this kind of tension between, is it new or is it something that this person has always been? And then we also had responses to the frequency questions, which range from never to every day. And when we look a little further, we saw, you know, variance in terms of people were having these conversations every day, every few days, every weeks, every month. So we really got the full range of responses. And most of those differences can be attributed to the way that people define coming out. When you think of coming out as as any sort of implicit mention of your identity, then it happens much more frequently because every conversation I have is an expression of who I am as a queer person. Or if you think of coming out as this major life turning process, then it happens far less frequency and it's much more transition based. I have these big conversations when I move to a new place, when I come out for the first time, things like that. The major conclusions that come from this study can be practical in the way that we continue to do research on queer populations moving forward. It helps us recenter the experiences of queer people and really put the definition of coming out back into the language of the people that we're studying. And it helps us reframe research from this perspective that coming out is this abnormal process that only queer people do, and it only happens every now and then. It shifts that idea to one where communicating outness is an everyday practice, and it's just as common in the lives of queer people as other communication behaviors like communicating support, asking for help, providing advice or providing instruction or persuading people. So this really changes the way that we think about and can study coming out conversations, but by placing the emphasis back on the way that queer people are really defining those coming out conversations. Thank you.